Progress.
And with us tonight, we have Councilmember Jack Walsh, who is a member of the committee. We have Councilmember Honda, who is sitting in, Councilmember McDaniel, and Council President Linda Kochmar, who is with us today. The first order of business is...
I'm here online.
Oh, Lydia, sorry, I didn't look at the screen. Thank you for attending. And then we will move right to public comment. This is where you have 3 minutes to come forward and address the committee. I have one sheet. James would like to, is it Jawilliam? Tell me how to do that. I know the name, but I did it wrong.
It's all good. On a daily basis, I explain my name. Jameis Gwilliam.
Jameis.
Just
sorry.
to keep you on your toes, we threw some other letters in there.
Well, Jameis, you're welcome to address the council, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I'm Jameis Gwilliam with Merlot & Geyer, and while I was here with you, just wanted to extend really appreciation to staff. We've been working with staff through the years that we've owned the Commons Mall, and we're really appreciative of their willingness to work with us through a number of different real estate cycles now that we've been through, including the renovation of the former Sears building that some of you have been able to come over and tour, and we're really pleased with how that's turned out. Obviously, a lot of changes going on with Sound Transit. We've been working with Sound Transit for a while and keeping our tenants happy, and we're looking forward to the next step of negotiating a development agreement and looking at putting some parameters around a long-term redevelopment plan for the property. We know that that's been an important component of the downtown, the city center for the city of Federal Way for a long time. We don't take that lightly. We recognize that there are goals and objectives that the city has, and just wanted to, again, thank staff for the work that they've done and let the council know that we're planning to continue those conversations in good faith, and hopefully we can come out with something that we're all proud of. So.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for addressing us. That will move us to item A, which is approval of the minutes from May 6, 2024. Do I have a motion?
I move approval of the May 6th committee minute. I move approval of the May 6th minutes.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, well, go to item B, which is initiation of the development agreement for the Commons. Keith?
Good evening, Committee Chair Dovey, Committee Member Walsh, Council President Kochmar, and Council Members Keith Niven, Community Development Director. So this evening, do I need to click to join audio? No. Okay. So, great. So the policy question in front of the City Council: should the City Council initiate negotiation of a development agreement with Merlot & Geyer Partnership for the Commons? So the Commons Mall sits in between, I could go quicker, sits in between South 320th Street and South 324th Streets, east of Pack Highway and west of 23rd Avenue South, as you all know. It is currently a retail mall with independent pads facing 320th and Pack Highway. So that is my entire presentation, fairly quick. So as Title 1985 states, which is our city code, relating to development agreements, the City Council needs to authorize initiation of a development agreement. As you heard from Jameis, Merlot & Geyer Partners is looking to start formally negotiating a development agreement with city staff. And we need your okay to do that. So with that, I'm here for questions if you have any.
Councilmember McDaniel?
No question, just a comment. Since we're going to negotiations, one of the things that has been brought up multiple times is the movie theater. So I'd just like to make sure that's kept in the conversation.
And do you have anything more specific on the movie theater,
I-
council member, in terms of its continuance or
on
some
the-
kind of an entertainment use? Is that important on the site?
Yeah, in my mind, having at least some kind of a draw. I mean, the closest movie theaters we have, if you don't go there, is Tacoma, Tukwila, or down to Auburn. So I'd like to have that draw there. I mean, the movie theaters are completely changed over the decades. So whatever the new model looks like, but having that kind of draw, I think, is still kind of important to be in that area.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Honda?
Thank you. What is the timeline?
That's a great question. Everybody always thinks a development agreement takes about 3 months to negotiate. I've yet to see one that takes much less than a year. So we will work hard. I know that Merlone Geyer would like for us to be done by the end of the year. I'm going to guess with you this will go into the first quarter of next year, if I had to guess.
So, once a development agreement is done and agreed upon, then what's the timeline after that?
Sure. So typically, development agreements have a certain term associated with them in terms of how long they are good for. They could require a start point, but typically they do not. Usually it's up to the developer to initiate when financially it makes sense for them to. I don't know if you want to add anything to that point, because it's really typically left up to the developer. Thanks, Keith.
Thanks for the question. And I don't know if your question is specific to the timing of when we would start, like, construction?
Redevelopment.
Yeah, so there are operating businesses at the mall, as you're probably aware of, and so we have an obligation to make sure that they have an environment where they can succeed, and we have obligations under our leases. But as you saw with Macy's, some of the tenants leave without us really knowing, right? They left, it was a surprise. So the development agreement provides us with a framework that we can respond to any changes in the market, and we can also proactively explore some of the tenants if they want to leave and allow us to move forward sooner. So we don't have a definitive timeline of when any development would start. It's really contingent on the tenants that are at the mall.
So one thing I hear from community members, they like to say the mall, the Commons, is dying. And I was surprised walking through recently how many stores in the center of the mall are gone. Are you trying to get more stores in there, or?
So there's a balance, right, between new stores mean committing to new long-term leases, which would be in some ways in contrast with what the city has expressed as the desire for this to become more of a mixed-use environment. And so we're having to balance those things, it's a challenge. We're keeping those spaces full as much as we can. The mall business as well is just difficult right now. There are a handful, there are less department stores that are operating. Those are usually the draws that bring foot traffic into the mall. So fortunately, our team does a really good job managing it and keeping businesses in spaces as they become vacant the best that we can. But we're balancing those two somewhat conflicting push and pull of redevelopment versus making sure that there's an environment for the businesses to operate in.
And one last question, is the pads on the outside of the mall, the new buildings, would they stay with the new development, or would they be redone?
They would stay with the new development, yeah. We have long-term leases on all of those new pad buildings. And then even the pads that have been there for a while, there's quite a bit of lease term. So we'll come forward with a more defined plan as part of kind of the next iteration as we get into this.
Okay,
We're in early stages right now.
thanks very much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Walsh?
I just wanted to second Councilmember McDaniel's concern that we'd like the theater to stay in some form or another. So anyway, but we're.
I've written down the continuation of theater and/or entertainment use.
Yeah,
on
and,
the property.
but we're excited for things to progress. All right.
I just have one question. As you go through redevelopment, is there a target number of housing units, or is that, I mean, I'm sure that's part of the development agreement. And, you know, what do we got, 11,800 we have to do over some period of time? You got a ballpark? Is it somewhere in the 800 to 1,000 or 500 to 700, or, not that it's gonna hold anybody to it, I'm just curious.
So that first guess was fairly darn close. I'm going to guess with you, obviously that'll be a detail that we negotiate into the development agreement, but, you know, somewhere around 1,200 to 1,600 units would be, I think, perfect for us in terms of meeting our target for growth.
Okay. And then you've talked a lot about the 320 dip. Will that be part of the discussions of how we can land something on the new redeveloped area so we could cross the 320th in a safe and secure manner?
We've had those conversations with Merlone Geyer in terms of helping us to get that to happen, and so far that's definitely going to be part of our conversation.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, we have a motion?
Yes, I move to forward the request of the June 18, 2024 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keith. Thank you for moving ahead. We appreciate it. Okay, we'll move to item C, authorization to bid medium fencing project on Pack Highway South, South 304th to 308th Street.
Rob? All right. Good evening, thanks. Jason Kennedy, Senior Traffic Engineer. I'm presenting on the median fencing project proposed for Pacific Highway between South 304th Street and South 308th Street. So the policy question is, should City Council authorize the staff to proceed with preparing and bidding the median fencing project on Pacific Highway between South 304th Street and 308th Street, and then return to Land Use and Transportation Committee and Council for the authorization to award? So a little background on this proposed project is that essentially it kind of started from what stemmed from a serious injury pedestrian crash that took place at the intersection of Pacific Highway and South 308th Street back in November involving a high school student. And following that crash, mostly the school district approached the city, but stakeholders discussed the situation, and we held several meetings and email conversations and internal meetings in Public Works and with police, and discussed this as a general pedestrian safety issue in general along this corridor in the context of the crash. But the stakeholders that we worked on this, we came up with we discussed several ideas that had covered a broad range of ideas and potential implementations, both from, from an engineering, enforcement, and education standpoint. So our component, the engineering side from Public Works, we had several ideas and solutions that we've agreed upon and proposed. The purpose of this presentation is focusing on one of them, which is the median fencing on Pacific Highway in that corridor. So most of the other items that we've agreed to are going to be something that the staff or King County, which is our contractor for our street maintenance and operations, is involved in, but our city crews will have to do some of the preparation for the site, but we will need a contractor to do the fencing itself. So that's why we're coming to you tonight. So Public Works will utilize our small Public Works contracting vehicle, which is through the MRSC roster, to fulfill this need. And here is the proposed fencing, approximately 1,200 feet, essentially going from close to the end of the nose of each intersection along the median, along the center line. And in terms of the budget for this, our estimation, as best we have it right now, is basically about $250,000 total. Not all of that is the fencing, only that approximately 144 for the actual construction plus contingency and management. That's, a little bit more than 170,000. The rest of it's involving our design and other improvements, which I mentioned earlier, which are not part of this proposal tonight. Our funding came from TIB, and then we have our match, which is part of the total $250,000 approximate. So we're asking if this moves forward, to authorize to proceed with preparing and bidding the median fence project and then return to you for authorization of award. Any questions?
Okay, Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, a couple of questions. First, since it's a state highway, it seems like there'd be state funds that would be helping with that.
There's no state money for this.
No?
We were actually approached by TIB to go forward for this proposal to apply for this, so it's actually something that they encouraged us to do.
Okay, all right. And then, other question, how high is the fence? What it'll look like? Tell us a little bit.
Well, we haven't finalized and landed on the full design of it. We've already started looking at that, obviously. We have to take in consideration the purpose of it, which is the main purpose is to encourage pedestrians to walk to the intersections and cross there.
Kind of a novel idea.
And so we know that we're gonna, roughly be a 6-foot high fence, with some particulars in terms of what it needs to be in terms of the design of it. But we haven't finalized it completely, but we do have a good idea on what it'll look like. It's not a crash barrier type fence that you would see on a highway, so this is just meant to keep pedestrians from crossing in the median.
Okay. I mean, my main concern, I definitely see the need for it, but it's an area where we want it to look, not detract from the environment, and I'm trying to figure out what kind of fencing would not detract aesthetically, so.
Yeah, I think we recognize that as well, and we've had those discussions internally. I think we've looked at some fencing in the area that actually is nearby, and looked at some other examples throughout the country and some already, implementation. So we've had a pretty good look internally of what a variety of designs could look like, and, right now we're kind of leaning towards a black fence that has, basically a no top rail that would help prevent people from trying to get on top of it to climb over it. But those are kind of the general design, portions that we've discussed so far, and that's kind of where we're at right now. But we're getting close to that once we get, obviously, authorization to move forward, to actually go forward to what our specifications are in our bid.
Okay. Well, would you be able to see through from one side to the other
Yes,
side
yes.
and stuff? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember McDaniel?
Yeah, I think this is gonna look ugly, and I don't think it's gonna really make a difference, to be honest. And my concern would be okay, if we do it down there, then what about the rest of Pack Highway? Because they're jaywalking everywhere. So, that's, my question though would be, the proposal you had the fence, but you also had other aspects of it. Are those other aspects tied in with the fence, or are they separate pieces of a different, project that's been added to this?
Yeah, there are other components that are not related to the fence. They're just additional countermeasures, implementations that we felt were, as a comprehensive approach to dealing with this sort of issue in this corridor. So not only is it the engineering stuff that we're handling internally, but also some education. The school district has done some things on their side, and then the police, of course, have offered their assistance in terms of enforcement. and that sort of thing. So again, it's a comprehensive approach to this issue.
Okay. Yeah, I have no problem with some of the signs. The fence in my mind is a no-go for me. So, thank you.
Councilmember Honda?
Thank you. So on this list of items that are being done to make this safer for the students, and not just the students, but anyone who is crossing that intersection, what has been done, and when will the other items be done?
Well, we did give our discussion with the school district that we would wrap up all of our items, including the fencing plus all the other non-fencing related items by the time school started in the fall. So that's our timeline. We feel like we can get that, obviously, assuming we can move forward with the fencing, now. But in terms of what's been already done, we've added left turn signals, signal heads at the intersection of South 308th. For the east and west traffic on South 308th Street. And we will be also then doing the other items, which are included freshening up pavement markings, crosswalks, and stop lines, as well as adding 2 school zone advisory flashers. So we will be, they're not, they're not enforceable, but they are advisory. And then we will also be adding what are called tattletale lights, which are basically red light indications so that the police can see if the signal is red from behind, from a different location, and then of course enforce any red light runners at that point. So those are, and then we're also adding some higher luminance, higher wattage streetlights at this intersection of South 308th Street and Pacific Highway to increase the luminance there as well. So, and that will all be done by the time school begins in the fall.
That's good to hear. So the fence, I'm at Federal Way High on Thursdays when school gets out. And what I've noticed since the new building's been up is that kids are running across the street because of the bus stop. It's on the other side. And I'm wondering if we could work with Metro that if the kids see the bus coming, that they don't run across the street to catch it. If Metro could be considerate enough to stay there just a little bit longer if they see a kid trying to catch the bus, because I see that as something, as one reason why kids are not going to the crosswalk and crossing.
Sure, yeah, I think we could definitely reach out to King County Metro and have that conversation and ask that. We obviously, it's their operations, but that is a rapid ride line, and I believe it comes every 10 minutes in the afternoon, so,
Yeah,
at
but
the
a
worst
kid's not,
case.
if they see the bus coming,
I
they're not
know,
gonna wait
yes.
for 10 to 15
But we can definitely
minutes,
make
and
that
that's why.
request and see what they're willing to do in terms of holding.
Especially if they see kids trying to catch that bus. As to the speed limit, when will that be reduced?
So the statutory speed limit will not be reduced. We will have an advisory speed sign, which is 30 miles an hour. So that, again, is part of the flashers, flasher assembly. And it's going to be, both in the morning and the afternoon for when the school bell, or typically a flasher period of time, which is we typically have, at our other schools that are 5 minutes in the morning, 25 minutes in the morning before the bell, and 5 minutes after the bell. That's when the school flashers are turned on, and then the reverse in the afternoon. So the first 5 minutes before the bell, and then 25 minutes after the bell. So that's the duration when the flashers will be on. But again, the speed is not, enforceable in terms of a enforceable speed limit.
So what is the current speed?
Right now, it's 40. It's posted 40.
And it'll go down to a recommended speed of 30
Advisory 30, yes.
and not 20 like other school zones?
Correct. And
Reason?
well, basically the reason was in terms of being able to get people to actually do it. 20 mile differential is a significant amount on a multi-lane street like Pacific Highway. So the thought was that if we come somewhere in the middle, around 30, that would be a likely reasonable speed that which we could get people to hopefully slow down to. And it's just, the compliance is not going to likely be very good at 20 miles an hour. And plus, that would cause a significant delay, through the corridor at 20 miles an hour. So that's kind of where we decided that 30 was probably the best advisory speed to put.
Have any studies been done to show what the actual speed is of most cars going through that area?
We did collect some data sometime in the past few months. I don't have the month actually right in front of me, but we do have, the speeds at the 85th percentile and that sort of thing. So I could provide that to you, if you'd like that.
I would like that. And I'm just curious, if someone was hit by a car going 30 as opposed to going 20, what is a potential injury
Well,
probability?
I don't have that in front of me. NHTSA does have some data that, essentially provides, what likelihood of fatality is, based on different speeds, but, I don't have that, in front of me right now, so I can get that to you
Okay.
as well.
And as to the fence, I think kids are pretty creative, and if they find a way to go over it, they would. They might even consider it a challenge to go over it. But to keep it looking nice, perhaps it could be a fence that has flowers or ivy or something growing on it to make it look like it belongs there instead of doesn't. But just an idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, Councilmember Hans's idea of talking to Metro and seeing if the buses could delay or when they're there. It sounds great, but I don't think it would do anything. I mean, if the buses stay another 30 seconds, it means that people that are coming across 30 seconds later are still going to be doing the same thing. And so it would be not, I think it would be pointless, really, with that. It just means that there's a longer window for the kids to decide that they're going to rush across there. So my thoughts.
So my one question is, we know it's going to get run into. I mean, all the trees get hit at least on a regular basis. So what's the contingency budget to replace this thing every couple years, or at what point are we going to, and it doesn't look like the school district contributing any money, right?
They're not. So, I mean, the school district asked for us to do something in the median, the fence. I mean, that's where the idea came from. We came to council and asked for authorization to go to TIB and give us a grant for them to fund building it, and subsequently accepted the grant. So we are on the hook to build this with TIB at this point. That being said, it's proposed as a modular system, so you can replace specific panels in the event of a crash. There is not a specific identified budget to replace specific panels, but, that being said, that's just part of our operational costs. We have the same conversation around many different aspects of what we replace in the right of way.
Okay. Great. Councilmember Daniel?
Yeah, a quick follow-up question. You said on the hook. What do you mean by on the hook?
The city executed a contract saying we would use the funding that TIB awarded us to build a fence in the median.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I see no questions. Do we have a motion?
I move to forward the proposed option 1 to the June 18, 2024 consent agenda for approval. And actually, I think I may want to, considering Councilmember McDaniel's concern, perhaps it should go on the business agenda instead of the.
Well, if you're going to pull it, why don't we just put it on business
Okay,
agenda
all right.
anyway? That way it's
All right.
one less thing we have to do
All right.
in the meeting tomorrow
Yeah.
when we have it, okay?
So I move to forward the proposed option 1 to the June 18, 2024 business agenda.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you very much. Excuse me, 2025, 2030 Transportation Improvement Program. Mr. Perez.
Okay, yeah, I'll bring this up here. Okay.
I should say, Lydia, if you have questions, make sure you let me know, okay? Because I don't always look
Okay,
there.
will do. Thank you.
Okay, we're ready to go. Good evening. So, the policy question is, should the council authorize staff to proceed with the adoption of the 2025 to 2030 City of Federal Way Transportation Improvement Program at the council meeting on June 18th, 2024? So our 6-year transportation improvement plan outlines a 6-year plan for transportation-related capital projects. This is updated annually and is a requirement for grant eligibility. It must be financially constrained in that we need to have at least a reasonable chance of fully funding the projects in the first 3 years. And projects must also conform to regional air quality requirements and is adopted after a public hearing. So the prioritization criteria that council adopted a few years ago include aspects such as level of service improvement, 3 different measures on safety, whether a project is supportive of high occupancy vehicles or non-motorized users, level of community support, the air quality impacts, ease of implementation, and benefit cost ratio. This is a map showing all the different proposals in this 6-year plan. Compared to previous years, we've completed these projects here. SR 509 at 47th Avenue Southwest, the compact roundabout there. The detection upgrades for City Center on Stage 2 of the Adaptive Traffic Control System. And on 509, the Lakota Safe Routes to School project from 312th to 21st Avenue Southwest. Amongst the new projects proposed as part of City Center Access project to ultimately construct a full access at I-5 and 324th would be a roundabout at 23rd Avenue South and South 324th Street. And the reason we're breaking this out is to help capture the costs associated with it. So we're in negotiations with Sound Transit about possibly having them construct it for us as part of the relocation of the BPA power lines, since that will modify our original design as part of the extension to the operations and maintenance facility. An overlay on South 320th Street between SR 99 and I-5 that we're getting a grant for. An extension of South 332nd Street between 13th Place South and Highway 99. On 21st Southwest, another grant-funded overlay project between 339th and 320th. We also recently received a local road safety plan grant from PSRC. That's federal funds, and so we'll be embarking on that. The streetlight infill project that was recently awarded. And another project we're proposing is traffic signal rehabilitation program. So, you know, we added a whole lot of new traffic signals over the last 20 years, and some of the old ones that we inherited upon incorporation are now at a point where if we have a signal pole knocked down, we're going to be in a world of hurt because the oldest traffic signals, the conduits are rusted, they're full. We aren't going to get any new wires through them. So if we get a pole knocked down, we're going to have to rig up a temporary span wire installation until we can get them replaced. So we're proposing a new program for that to replace. There are 4 that were 50 years old now. Military and 288th will be reconstructed as part of the next phase of the 288th road diet project. The other 3 oldest are on Southwest 320th here at 8th South, First South and 21st Southwest. So those are the highest priorities to be replaced. Finally, a new phase of what we call the Pacific Highway Trail from 288th to 272nd. And that's an extension of the one that we're just bidding Phase 1. We've got Phase 2 coming up in a couple of years, up to 288th, and this would extend up to Des Moines. So, of the options considered, option 1 is to approve the resolution adopting the 2025-2030 Transportation Improvement Program as presented, or 2, do not forward the draft document and provide direction to staff. The mayor's recommendation is to forward option 1 to the June 18th City Council public hearing for approval of the resolution adopting the TIP as presented. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, I don't see any, I see a question there, Councilmember
Hey,
Walsh.
could you just go back to that, the last thing, Pacific Highway South Trail? I mean, obviously, that's a picture of the BPA trail, not the.
Well, right, we just
But
borrowed the
anyway,
signal,
but
yeah.
between 288th and 272nd, is a trail going adjacent to the Pac Highway, or what was
Right,
it?
so this project is labeled 42C on this map, and basically it would come down the hill on 16th Avenue South, and then follow 18th Place up to 279th, provide a zigzag up the hill to Pac Highway, and then actually follow 16th Avenue South up to 272nd.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you.
Okay, can I have a motion?
I move to forward the proposed resolution to the June 18, 2024 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Perez.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to City of Tacoma Department of Public Utilities, Tacoma Water Franchise Ordinance.
Good evening. Oops. All right. Good evening. I am here to present the Tacoma Water Franchise Ordinance. Hold on. There we go. Policy question. Should the city grant Tacoma Water a non-exclusive franchise to occupy specific rights-of-way for the purposes of constructing, maintaining, operating, replacing, and repairing a water distribution and transmission system within and through the city of Federal Way? So Tacoma Water currently serves a portion of the city of Federal Way. It's primarily, the service area is west of Hoyt Road. And they also have one water transmission main. It's called the second pipeline, which is why I have a mistake in the memo that says 2 water lines. It's one transmission line that runs through Federal Way. Tacoma Water had an existing franchise agreement. It expired in November 2022. So this is a brand-new one. It has a 10-year term. It has automatic extension for 2 5-year periods. They will they will continue to do hydrant and fire suppression system maintenance, and their insurance is consistent with city standards. So this is the map showing the franchise area. Again, they serve the area of the west end of Federal Way, primarily west of Hoyt Road. And the green line that runs kind of diagonal, starting at 320th and High 5, is their second supply water transmission line. As far as financial impacts, they provided a $5,000 deposit for franchise development to cover our costs for development and adoption. In the future, then, they will continue to pay for their right-of-way permits for construction work, an annual blanket right-of-way permit for maintenance, and we collect utility taxes from them in accordance with our code. So the recommended options, the options consider adoption of the proposed Tacoma Water Franchise Ordinance and forward it to City Council for first reading, and do not adopt the proposed ordinance, provide direction to staff. The mayor recommends option 1, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So my one question is, it expired in 2022 and we're in 2024. Is this just something we never thought about? Anybody said, hey, we need to do it again? Or was there some reason why it's taken so long to do what appears to be a simple thing?
The history behind that is that they did call in 2022, but they called too late because they have to ask 180 days in advance for their extension,
Okay,
and they contacted us too late.
okay, got it.
So it was just kind of an oversight.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. Do I have a motion?
I move to forward the proposed ordinance to first reading on June 18, 2024.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to talk about authorization to enter into an interlocal agreement with HGAC by. Okay,
In fairness, this might be the driest presentation I've done before council in
Just have-
years.
just say questions and say yes.
We could skip to that if you want.
Was Houston Galveston considering relocating in the tide class or something, or, yeah, so it's,
Close. All right, so this is the authorization to enter into an interlocal agreement with HGAC by, and for the record, I'm EJ Walsh, and good evening, members of council. So the policy question is, should city council authorize execution of an interlocal agreement with the Houston Galveston Area Council, which is also known as HGAC by? So, as slight background, we were under the impression we were already members of this. We are not. So HGAC by is a national governmental interlocal purchasing cooperative. They are the largest governmental interlocal cooperating agency in the country. And they focus specifically on municipal equipment and vehicles, and not just around public works, but around police and parks as well. So they include both manufacturers direct, so companies like Ford, Toro Mowers, et cetera. They also include third-party retailers. That would include companies that upfit things. So like if you buy a new vehicle and you need someone to go put lights on it, it includes the retailers that do that as well. As I mentioned, we were under the impression we were already members of this until we got proved wrong. Luckily, we didn't buy anything using it. But within Washington, there are 317 government agencies that are members. There's a list on the screen of a couple that are immediately adjacent to us, so it includes the majority of our neighbors. It also includes, it's actually not on here, but South King Fire is a member. Multiple other fire departments are. Lake Haven Water and Sewer, and as well as like Tacoma Metro Parks is a member. So there's a lot of government agencies that are not municipal governments on here as well. So becoming a member does not encumber funding or authorization to purchase any specific items. What it does do is it allows us to look at different options. So we are on Sourcewell, which is the federal contract. We're on GSA, which is a separate federal contract. We obviously leverage Washington State very heavily. This provides option 4. So some companies, and I'll use Ford as an example because we use them a lot for everything from police cars to trucks. They will give different discounts to different vendors. So they'll give a different discount to this versus the state versus the feds based on how many units they think they can sell through that agency. When we go out and we look at items, we tend to check all of them and figure out which one's the best option for the city to get the, you know, especially if it's a F-150 pickup truck, which one can we get it from for the lowest cost? Because it's not, as much as we all want to think it should be the same price, if you look at any of these options, it's not. So this gives us another data point to leverage for the benefit of the city. This agenda item does not authorize purchasing anything specific. I do want to make that clear. This is just allowing us to become a member, which is no cost to the city. It just allows us to execute the interlocal agreement with the Houston Galveston Area Council. Or option 2 is do not authorize staff to proceed and provide direction to staff. Mayor recommends option 1, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Daniel?
Just one quick one. Did we realize that we weren't part of it when you guys were researching the cyclone? That's the next item.
Yes.
Figured. Thank you.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I move to forward the option 1 to the June 18, 2024 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, let's talk about the purchase of a hard surface cleaner using surface water management funds.
So this one is a little bit more entertaining, but I'll be honest and say not much. So as Chair Dovey mentioned, this agenda item is the authorization to purchase a hard surface cleaner using surface water management funds, and if this advances. So the policy question is, should the City Council authorize staff to proceed with purchasing a hard surface cleaner using SWIM funding? So as background information, and this is specifically around pervious pavement is the driving force behind that, but as you'll see, this is a tool that we can use for a lot more than just that. We have previously installed and accepted dedication from developers of pervious concrete in several locations. We've accepted it in both the parks, so West Hylobos Park is almost entirely pervious pavement. Panther Lake Park, both the parking lot and the trail itself where it's paved is pervious pavement. We also have it along the street, so South 312th Street is all pervious pavement, and First Avenue is not all pervious pavement, but from 336 to about 324th is. We also have it in places like Town Square Park. We have it down on 373rd. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. So for background information, so pervious pavement, it looks like concrete, looks like with effectively poles or pores in it. And it has a stone base underneath of it. So the concept is that it allows the water that's flowing across it to actually infiltrate through it and down into the stone base. There's a lot of environmental advantages to that as far as promoting infiltration, reducing pollutant loading, spreading out pollutant generating surfaces, and a whole host of other things. The caveat to that is you're supposed to clean it on an annual basis, according to both King County and Ecology. As of today, we actually, as a city, do not have a way to clean it. So the approach that we have used at Town Square Park is a power washer. And what happened is we actually effectively made the situation worse. So a power washer, instead of sucking the material up, it embeds it. It does what you think it would. The power washer pushes it down further into the pores, further embedding it. What happens as you do that multiple times is you create a impervious surface inside the pervious concrete. That allows water to get in there and to freeze thaw, which leads to failure, at least to cracking. It also, in the areas like along the roadways, part of the reason you clean it is to remove the pollutants and dispose of them properly. So if we're not cleaning it, we're not actually getting those pollutants out that it was originally designed to remove. The reason this came up is the next one, so localized flooding. So as this infrastructure starts to age and it loses its pervious properties and it starts to infiltrate, the majority of these facilities are not designed with traditional stormwater inlets and pipes where if there's an overflow, the water goes somewhere. So we saw this in two of the parking lots where the water effectively started ponding on the parking lot because it's curbed. You've got all the pervious pavement, the water's supposed to go down, but it's not. So we start seeing localized flooding. With all of that, what we've effectively done is we have created an environment that's really prone to making moss grow. So we've created a hard surface with lots of pollutants that the water doesn't drain, so you have a nice dark, wet environment. So when you go out and you clean the surface of this, we remove the moss from the surface of the structure, but not inside of it. So it looks great for about a month, and then the moss comes back. So what it does is it actually removes all the material. So it's not sanitizing it, it's not bleaching it, it's not going to prevent moss from growing back eventually in the future. But as opposed to a pressure washer that's pushing all the moss spores down into that layer where it's actually breeding, you're pulling it up with effectively a vacuum and disposing them. So it does eliminate many of the moss problems we've been seeing. And as I mentioned, we actually do not own equipment to clean this. So what we did is this is the picture on the left-hand side is the actual machine we are looking at. It's for those of you that have seen the MadVac or the Snuffleupagus or one of the other 20 names it's got floating around the city. It's about the same size. So it is effectively a glorified pressure washer that doesn't shoot straight down. It shoots on a 45-degree angle and a very high volume vacuum that lifts all the material as it's being injected and pulls it back up into that back white tank that you see on the back. We had a contractor come out and do Panther Lake parking lot where we were, as I mentioned, experiencing some flooding. The lines that you are seeing is the dirt that the machine was able to pull up in one pass out of the surface beyond what it could vacuum. So we were pulling effectively so much dirt out of, and that's true in both pictures. We're pulling so much dirt out of the surface because it hasn't been cleaned since it was installed in 2018. The vacuum was able to pull it out of the pavement, but not lift it into the vacuum. So we were effectively left with lines of dirt on top of the pavement, which we subsequently cleaned up. So the other thing I will point out, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a very fancy pressure washer vacuum combination with a lot of engineering behind it. It will clean any hard surface. So we've already looked at and we talked to the manufacturer, and they use it in everything. They sell it to be used in everything from parking garages to sidewalks to anything that is a hard surface. So they have cities that use them on airports. So the Port of Tacoma has several of these that they use to power wash the sidewalks in both the drop-off and pickup areas in the public spaces as well as behind the scenes. They can be used on paver plazas, so similar to like Town Square Park, the actual paver plaza. It can be used to clean that, and basically at 8 miles an hour as opposed to someone standing there with a pressure washer. So it is, as Council Member McDaniel rightfully pointed out, it is available through HGAC Buy. We get a fairly significant discount by using that as opposed to paying retail. The estimated base cost, as it mentions, is $195,000 for this fully loaded. So that includes, minus tax, that includes the accessories we need to actually basically put on the street day one. The 401 Surface Water Management Fund, and the specific agenda item, or the agenda memo, sorry, has the budget line item in it. But the repairs and maintenance budget is budgeted at $441,000 for 2024. Of that, approximately $175,000 was allocated to cleaning surfaces. And this is really the reason I'm standing here. We looked at that. We will not be able to clean all the pervious pavement that the city owns for that price. And this is supposed to be something that's done on an annual basis. So we would need to add about $50,000 to do all of the pervious pavement on an annual basis for 1 year. And we have to do this every year, and we can buy the machine for $195,000. So that's basically where we started taking a pretty hard look at this and said, this fiscally makes a lot more sense just to buy the machine. We then went and talked to the Parks Department and said, hey, if we buy this, is it going to be helpful for you to be able to go clean? Even like Celebration Park was one of the examples we used kind of around the baseball fields. Is this something that would decrease your workload that you would take advantage? And they basically asked when it'll be delivered. I mean, they're all for this, being able to have one staff member out there and get that work done a lot faster. So the two options before council is to authorize staff to proceed with purchasing a hard surface cleaner, or option 2, do not authorize staff to proceed and provide direction. Mayor recommends option 1, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Walsh.
Oh,
Oh.
I'm ready to make a motion if there's, oh,
Okay,
no.
we'll go down the other way.
He's ready to go.
Councilmember McDaniel.
The concrete you're talking about, are we like using more of it? Is it like the future, we're just gonna continue to be using this kind of concrete in the future?
So, as a city, we've actually stopped installing it. It is something that's in the King County Stormwater Design Manual that we have to accept if a developer puts it in to standard and dedicates it to us. There are applications like, sticking with the examples that were on here tonight, First Avenue, it meant we didn't need to take the parking lot on or the 7-Eleven parking lot at, what is that, 332nd, 336, right there on the west side. When we did that project and we widened it and we replaced all those sidewalks, if we were to make the stormwater requirements work in a traditional fashion, we would have had to condemn their parking lot. So, are there projects like that where it makes sense to put this in the future? Most likely. Are we actively trying to install it everywhere? No, it's a maintenance headache.
Right. Is there quite an additional cost to use that kind of technology too? Or is it about par for, if you would use regular concrete versus this concrete, or a different surface that you would normally use?
So in this are you asking about an
Yeah,
installation?
just curious, the concrete itself, is it a more expensive
Yes,
product?
it
Okay.
is.
And the last question I have real quick is the training. Is it a pretty simple training? Do we need is it someone's gonna be trained on staff, or a couple different people will be on training?
Yeah, so as part of that price, they are flying their lead mechanic up, and they're doing a 2-day training with staff from both our fleet guys, our Parks Department, and our Public Works Department. That's in the price. That is fairly standard. That's the same training scope that we got with the Mad Vac or the even our giant Vector truck. It's pretty much the same.
Gotcha. Last question. So you're estimating that if we were to do this cleaning on an annual basis, 225,000 is about the cost it would be to third party this?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Honda.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about SWIM funding lately, especially with the maintenance and operations building. Do you know the balance in that fund, and what other costs they're anticipating over the next few years?
It's all in the budget. So this is within the expenditure of the 401 fund, so the operating budget. So on an annualized basis, I want to say that's about $3 million. So that will occur within the 401 fund. As far as a fund balance, which I think is really what your question was trying to get at, it's a little north of 6 million right now that's in the account. Most of that is actually in the CIP, the 304 capital project fund, not the 401. There's an interplay between 401 and 304. So all of the, and I don't know how far into property tax you want me to get, but when we collect revenue for SWIM, everything gets funneled into the 401 and then gets transferred from 401 to 304. So the lion's share of the budget stays in the 304 account for capital projects. Everything that we've been talking about for the maintenance yard is in that 304 account. Everything that we're talking about here tonight is within the 401 count, within what is expected to be our annualized 2024 spending. So as far as bottom line goes, there is no impact to the 401 fund as a result of this. What we're really doing is we are saying, instead of paying to have these surfaces cleaned, we're just buying the machine. But I'm not sure if that's exactly answering your question.
Well, my concern is, a few years ago, we had an increase
We did.
to the public for the SWIM fund. And I don't want to see that happen again in the near future. I want to make sure that we have the money in there that we need without jeopardizing, especially the maintenance and operations.
Yeah, and I will tell you, we do. So as part of that fund schedule that you're talking about, that was implemented in 2019, the part of that FCS study was we would not adjust the rate through 2029. So there's no rate adjustment proposed. And as I mentioned, I mean, this is really, are we going to spend $175,000 to go clean the surface, or are we going to spend a little bit more and buy the machine and not have to pay next year? That's really the conversation tonight.
My other question is, do we need to hire someone to do this, or will the existing staff member be able to do this?
We're proposing existing staff do this, not to hire.
Okay, thank you.
My one question is, it looks like this is a one-year break even.
Effectively, yes.
And so, in essence, we buy this and we train our staff, then in year 2, 3, and 4, we're gonna have an extra $250,000 to do something with.
175, yeah.
Yeah, 170,
Yeah.
but it's-
Yeah, so we program the maintenance of swim
Right.
on an annualized basis. So cleaning pervious asphalt was what was programmed for
Right,
2024.
but-
But to your point, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we're spending money, but we're not gonna have to spend the money for the rest of our life as a city as long as the machine works.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember McDaniel?
Just real quick, you said the funds were 401, and what was the other one?
304?
So is the 401 maintenance and 304 is capital? Or what are the two funds?
401 is operations, so it includes maintenance, but it also includes like the lake management districts, it includes engineering, it includes a lot more than just that, but it's all, I would say, annualized expenses,
Okay, and then what would you classify as 304 then?
capital.
Capital.
So it's, 304 is a long-range fund.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I move to forward the option 1 to the June 18, 2024 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we get to go to item H, comprehensive plan update, informational only, so we'll, hear more about this later after, there's no vote, right? Okay. I'm gonna stand up.
I'm not seeing it on the desktop, so give me a moment to navigate to the file. Nope, it is there, all right. I got it. All right. All right, good evening. This is the quarterly briefing on our comprehensive plan periodic update. This is a briefing on the housing chapter and the climate change and resiliency chapter. So we'll start with climate change and resiliency, and then Cheney will take over and cover housing. This is a brand-new chapter of our comprehensive plan. This is really the city's first long-range climate change plan. It addresses the reduction of the city's greenhouse gas emissions, as well as how we can become more resilient to the effects of climate change, but also all hazards, not just those that are affected by climate change. So in the midst of developing this chapter, last year the state passed House Bill 1181, which actually mandates that cities over a certain size, which we are over that size, we have to adopt a new element or chapter of our comprehensive plan on climate change and resiliency. We do not have to comply until the year 2029, but this effort was already underway. We actually, most of the work was done last year, and it was largely funded by a grant from the Department of Commerce. And in the midst of that, this House bill passed, and I think this is going to be a big first step to ensuring that we do fully comply by the year 2029. It will at least lower the amount of effort that we have to do in a inevitable additional comprehensive plan update that will have to come before council before 2029, probably through the annual amendment process. So, and it's worth noting, we're still waiting on the state to put out and complete its guidance and rulemaking on how exactly cities are to comply with 1181. Another reason that this chapter does not get us all the way there, and we do expect updates will be needed in the future. So the foundation of this chapter was a greenhouse gas study that was consultant-led, led by Cascadia Consulting last year. It was based on 2019 data. And it found that about 80% of the city's emissions come from on-road transportation as well as building emissions. The other 20% are spread across 8 other sources that you can see here, like refrigerants, the loss of tree cover, wastewater treatment, things like that. It also, that's a redundant slide there. It also showed different future emission scenarios. What's worth pointing out on this chart, and this is just taken right from the report, everything above the pink line is essentially our future projected emissions just with the implementation of existing state and federal policies. So that's like clean fuel standards and a state bill that was passed a few years ago that will require utilities like PSE to achieve net zero emissions by the year 2040, things like that. Basically, below that pink line, you'll see a little sliver of green. That's if it's like a privately initiated greenhouse gas effort from the air industry, basically like airlines and things like that, to reduce their overall emissions. So everything else in gray, that's kind of the additional marginal reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that we can achieve through the adoption of goals and policies and implementing actions that we've outlined in the draft chapter. We conducted, as you know, we've done a lot of public engagement for the overall comprehensive plan update over the last 2 years. We did several events last year that were targeted at this chapter in particular. And we also had a survey that I think over 100 people completed. And we've also heard from and had been discussions with different agencies that have been actively engaged in climate change planning for longer than we have. Some of the themes that we've heard, a lot about trees, preserving our existing tree canopy and green space, and efforts to plant more trees. And so we have goals and policies centered around tree preservation and expansion in the city. It is worth noting that most of the city's future growth, where we expect that to occur, also happens to be kind of our greatest tree desert. So there's a lot of co-benefits, both in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, achieving climate resiliency, public health goals, and equity goals that are true throughout our comprehensive plan. We heard a lot about waste management, more so a lot of questions about waste management, energy conservation, renewables use, and reducing automobile dependency in the city. So between public outreach, the development of other chapters of our comprehensive plan, as well as informed by the study that I discussed earlier, we have drafted goals and policies that implement this vision for 2044, that Federal Way has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions and increased its resilience to hazards, including those worsened by climate change. In achieving these outcomes, Federal Way has built robust partnerships, furthered equitable initiatives, improved public health, reduced disproportionate impacts on vulnerable communities, and involved the community and the public. Can't quite even read what's on the screen there. And enhance the overall quality of life for all residents. So our goals and policies are largely concentrated across 3 focus areas. One is reducing automobile dependency, building energy conservation, renewables, and waste reduction, as well as improved tree density and tree canopy equity. And that gets at what I mentioned earlier about where our future growth is, as far as where our greatest tree deserts are in the city. So that was all just half of this chapter. The other half is resiliency. And this focuses on reducing our risk to hazards, those enhanced by climate change like sea level rise, severe storms, heat waves, but also other hazards like earthquakes, landslides, things like that. And so that requires looking at what hazards are we vulnerable to, what is the vulnerability of our assets from city facilities to our population where we have the greatest population densities, and then that establishes what our risk is of future disaster. And so resiliency is about reducing that risk. This is largely going to be addressed through a hazard mitigation plan that's currently being led by our emergency manager in coordination with planning. And this would be the city's first hazard mitigation plan. It's actually a FEMA requirement in order to be eligible for certain FEMA grant funding. And it will address all the hazards that you see here: earthquakes, landslides, floods, pandemics, drought, all of the above. And this is actually going to be an annex to King County's regional hazard mitigation plan. It's expected that the HMP, the hazard mitigation plan, will be adopted next year. And so right now, it will be referenced in our comprehensive plan and potentially incorporated into our comprehensive plan by reference, as now or hereafter amended, just like a lot of other plans are. So, as I mentioned, the hazard mitigation plan will be adopted next year and incorporated into the comp plan. And then further work will be required before the year 2029 to fully comply with House Bill 1181, guidance of which is still forthcoming. So, any questions?
Yeah, I just have one. Is this going to increase the cost to develop in Federal Way, this plan?
That really depends on what policies are actually implemented. I don't expect, just based on the policies where we've identified some higher priority implementing actions, which is a very small list to start with this initial chapter. I don't anticipate that. I don't think there's any that would be a major shock to development in the city.
So basically, this is the roadmap of what we're going to see, and any policy changes comes to the council here, and we vote them up or down if we want to include them. So at the end of the day, we got a great report, but we may not change anything until it's required to keep the cost of development relatively fair.
There are some specific implementing actions, for example, around our tree density requirements.
Sure.
That could have a marginal effect that might come to before council as an ordinance sometime next year.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's higher level policy stuff at this point. But I think to fully comply with the menu of measures of actions the state has put out, the state's goals are pretty aggressive. I think setting net zero emissions by the year 2050. It's possible that there may be some more aggressive actions in the future when this is amended.
Hopefully, we plant a lot of trees. Okay, Councilmember McDaniel.
The only question I have is, how would the legislation that's currently in play right now with the electricity and natural gas, how would that be built into this part too, or is that completely something different?
I think a lot of that affects the utilities. So like the natural gas provider locally is Puget Sound Energy.
Yeah.
And so I don't see the city having that affecting any of the city's operations, or the city having to adopt anything to comply with that recent natural gas legislation that was passed. That's largely going to be addressed by natural gas utility providers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else, or?
That was it for
Sure.
this chapter, so we'll go on to housing.
Great, thank you.
I think we should keep going.
Huh? Oh, it's a tandem team. We got two reports. Thank you. Very well done. Your turn.
Hi, good evening. Land Use and Transportation Committee, I'm Cheney Skatson, Senior Planner, and I'll be giving a briefing on the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan. In today's presentation and in your packet, we'll go over a brief overview of the housing chapter, review the housing needs by income, a substantial change in how we're planning for housing this planning horizon, review current zoning capacity for being able to accommodate all housing types and housing need, and discuss some identified key housing topics that are new or emphasized in this periodic update. To begin, we'll start with the draft vision statement, something you'll notice what Evan went over in the climate change and resiliency chapters. Each of our chapters in the comp plan will have a vision statement, and this is the draft for the housing chapter. Federal Way is a dynamic and inclusive community where housing growth is aligned with regional targets, regulatory barriers are minimized, and a diverse range of housing options are available to all. Moving forward, so a part of something that is new with this chapter is a lot of supplementary analysis, and this is a document that's going to be an appendix to the comp plan, but it's about 70 pages, and it includes everything here on the screen. A detailed evaluation of a community profile, workforce profile, housing inventory, a racial disparate impact analysis, a housing needs assessment, a land capacity analysis, and evaluation of strategies to meet housing need. This holds a bulk of the assessment evaluation that informed the housing chapter. So it'll be out of the actual chapter. You won't be having to reading it. You won't have to read a really long document, but it'll still be available, and it's drafted now. Actually, going to be presented at Planning Commission on Wednesday. All right, diving into the housing needs by income band. I believe you all know that we are planning for a housing target by 2044 of 11,260 units. I've heard you say it, so that's great. Now this is those units disaggregated by income band. You can see on the far right, that is the tallest bar on the bar graph, and that is the housing need for incomes above 120% AMI. So over the mark, or over the 100% AMI. And not included on the graph is the 2,152 emergency housing units. The reason that's not included on the graph is because that's not a permanent housing unit, and the table here is or the graph is of permanent housing units. You can see there's kind of a lull, a dip in the graph towards the middle, and that's at the lowest point between 50 and 80% AMI, demonstrating or illustrating a lower need for those housing units at that income band. And that's because our housing need by income band was informed by our existing housing stock. And Federal Way has a sizable amount of housing that is affordable between 50 and 80% AMI, both income restricted and naturally occurring. So this is a kind of a depiction of the housing need we have that we're planning for by 2044. Following the above 120% AMI as the highest need at over 5,000 units is next our non-permanent supportive housing units at around 1,800 units. So that could, that's 0 to 30% AMI. Just kind of highlighting those two greatest needs. A key point to doing our comprehensive plan and taking our growth targets and allocating them around the city is ensuring that there's sufficient zone capacity. As part of the 2021 buildable lands assessment that we did with the county, there's sufficient capacity to accommodate housing units. We had a capacity of 14,077, I believe, housing units, and our housing target was 11,260. However, when we looked closer at permanent supportive housing and the development regulations and limitations that are existing in our code, there is insufficient capacity to accommodate the 946 units. You may recall adopting a buffer, a spacing requirement between projects that have 3 or more units for permanent supportive housing. That buffer is 7,040 feet. And depending on the zone, there's a limitation to the number of housing or units you can have on the property. So this map on the right is illustrates our trying to allocate the maximum capacity in the city of permanent supportive housing, and you'll notice that we fall quite short. Only 388 units can be accommodated in the city based on the existing zoning and vacant redevelopable and likely developable sites for permanent supportive housing, resulting in a deficit of 588 of the 946 PSH. permanent supportive housing units. So as a result, as part of the time that we adopt the comprehensive plan, we'll need to propose and draft some new development regulations to reduce or increase the capacity. And that can be done in a couple ways, and we're working with GIS now to see what fits best, but it likely will result in a reduction of the 7,040 buffering requirement, which I think is 1.33 miles, and then also could include increasing the maximum number of units allowed per facility in certain zones. So in our single-family zones, only 6 units are allowed on a site, and in our like CE zone, suburban estates, 10 units are allowed. We're not, at this point of at this stage, we're not proposing to increase the number of permanent supportive housing units in those zones, more so in our mixed-use and mid-rise zones that are near transit and near services, like the BC community business. It currently allows only 50 units per site, and CE allows 110, whereas the city center core zone allows 150. So we'll be working with GIS to further the analysis and being able to demonstrate we can accommodate 946 PSH units. And you can expect that by the time that we adopt the comp plan. Okay.
So quick question for Cheney. That's a pretty big change in our policy and the way we think. What's the process, or how is it going to come through land use, and so we can actually discuss it, and so we don't get so far into it, and then at the very end, we say, well, no, we're not interested in doing that. When's the plan that, I mean, are we in July, August? I mean, because you're asking to make a major brain shift.
Yeah. You know what, it might actually help to take
I'm not
one-
saying it's wrong or anything, I just don't want to get to the finish line and we don't cross it if that's what we don't want to do.
Sure, and I think I probably should have given some more context. When we adopted this 7,040 buffer, this 7,040-foot spacing requirement between projects that have 3 or more units of PSH, we were using a internal calculation for what our PSH need was. At that time, the state or the county had not disaggregated the units. We didn't know that we had a need of 946. We were kind of forecasting based on the point-in-time count and some other methodology that I think Keith could speak to. But, so a big reason for this is that the number has changed. We use an internal number versus a number that is provided for us.
Okay.
And, yeah, this code amendment will follow every, like, public hearing, LUTC. Whether we're in the analysis point right now, in order to adopt the changes by December, I would imagine coming back to LUTC in August.
Okay, great, thank you.
That's a rough estimate.
No,
Okay,
I was just wanted to get an idea.
yeah, okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
Councilman Walsh. you-
when did we get the 946 number?
That was or what's the word? I don't remember. So in the King County countywide planning policies. Of this year? No, it was prior. It's been amended, but the countywide planning policies have been amended like 3 times since they first came out. The last amendment, I believe, was in November of 2023. I think we've shared this disaggregation of housing units, the 11,260 by income band. I think at a previous LUTC briefing, you might recognize the table in the packet where it compares different metropolitan cities and their allocations. But it was, it's not codified. It was included in the countywide planning policies.
Okay. And what's so permanent supportive housing, so that's like what they're doing at the extended stay. So almost 1,000 units, like what they're doing at the extended stay.
Be a fun discussion.
And if we don't meet that target, what's the consequence?
I mean, we're not the one building it. We're just needing to demonstrate there's capacity for it to be built. And this is something that the Department of Commerce will be looking for when we submit our comprehensive plan. And the Department of Commerce has funded a lot of projects. I believe there could be issues with getting grants in the future if we don't comply, but I don't know if you have anything to add?
Councilman McDaniel, did you have a quick question?
Yeah, my question is going to be how this affects the hotel that was purchased by the Catholics that was within flying distance earlier.
I don't think there's an answer for that yet.
Gotcha.
So none of these units will happen without significant public funding. So the extended stay was purchased outright by the county. And any other facility that will be built in the city will be either purchased and funded completely by a nonprofit and/or public agency. So it's going to come down to, we have to plan for these units. How many get built is more a question of how much public and nonprofit funding there is out there to do such a thing. And so there is no penalty to the city if we don't get that many units in the next 20 years. We just have to plan for them.
So it's a planning thing, not a mandatory thing.
Well, I mean, we need to amend the code so
It's
that we have
mandatory that we
capacity.
plan for it then.
Just plan for them.
Yeah.
It's mandatory that we need to plan for
We need to
it.
plan for them.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Key housing topics. Here's a summary of some changes in the housing chapter. So the housing chapter, the 2015 housing chapter included a number of key housing topics, and some of them have been retained, some of them have been amended substantially, and then some have been removed, and while some have been added. New topics included here are in bold. So planning for equitable outcomes, preservation, and displacement. Those are new planning topics. There's been some changes to the special needs housing that's now kind of rebranded as inclusive and affordable housing. And the good design and diversifying housing choice has been amended to capture in the TOD and diversifying housing options section, and the preserving neighborhood character and community involvement and development review have been removed or kind of spread out among the different housing topics. So Federal Way's existing housing stock, and there's more information of this in the appendix I mentioned earlier, but it includes housing options ranging across typology, size, location, income served, and tenor, whether it's for rent or for ownership. However, there are a lot of misalignments currently between the housing that's built today, what Federal Way residents can afford, and what the cost is for new residential construction. The housing chapter, the city will be supporting opportunities for housing near transportation infrastructure, so near light rail stations, and expanding the diversity of housing options, so housing type, and increasing access to neighborhoods of choice. In addition, there are proposed goals and policies expanding and protecting opportunities for homeownership. It is also an overarching goal of the housing chapter to achieve a well-balanced housing stock that is inclusive to the diverse needs of the community and promotes equitable housing-related outcomes by as well as participating in regional level planning, and encourage the production and preservation of housing and limiting displacement. So as a precursor, that's kind of important because there are, we'll begin with planning for equitable outcomes. Planning for equity is to reduce disparities, to promote achieving similar experiences across different groups, whether it's race, ethnicity, income, homeownership, or renters. On the first table here, I'm sorry, these appear really blurry. I think they're larger in your packet, but the graph on the top left is the distribution of households by income, by race and ethnicity. You can see the dark blue on the left is lower income, and moving to light blue on the right hand is higher income. You may notice that there are some races and ethnicities in this graph that experience higher incomes than others. And this is important in understanding housing need because that directly influences how much a household can pay for housing, as well as with their likelihood to be cost burdened. whether they're spending more than they can afford on housing, leaving less for essentials like food, healthcare, and education. As well as home ownership, ability to pay for, or a down payment, and attaining home ownership. Historically, there are discriminatory practices like redlining and restrictive covenants that have prevented people of color from buying in certain neighborhoods. And Federal Way, while a lot of that predates the city, those legacies are evident today. And this has long-term impacts, as homeownership is a primary way to build wealth. And as evident in the data, I'm referring to the graph on the bottom left of the screen. The dark blue is the percentage of homeownership versus likelihood of renting. Orange is renting, blue is homeownership. So you can see there are certain races, ethnicities in this graph that are much more likely to be renting than owning, and vice versa. So white and Asian households, I think, are 69% homeowners and 11% renters, whereas other race, Hispanic and Black or African American, are 33, 37, and 25% likelihood to be, are homeowners versus renters. And lastly, the cost burdening. The orange on the screen is indicating the severe rate of cost burdening. It's a percentage of the total population by race and ethnicity in this graph. Yellow is cost burdening, blue is not cost burdened, and green is not calculated. You can see, again, white and Asian households make up a larger. White and Asian households make up a larger share of not cost burdened households. And I should have said this earlier. Being cost burdened is spending more than 30% of your income on housing, whereas being severely cost burdened is spending more than 50% of your income on housing. There's not a huge difference. I mean, maybe like 6% in the severe cost burdening, but you see a substantial increase in the cost burdening between notably Black and African American households and households of color versus Asian and white and other race. Okay, moving on to one of the, just more details on preservation, one of those key housing topics for the city. 57.6% of the housing units in the city serve incomes below 80% AMI, so more than almost, I guess, 57% of our existing housing stock is serving that low income band. That's why our housing need for that income band, the 50 to 80, is so low, is we have so much housing already there. Of those units, only 15% are subsidized affordable housing, meaning that there are restrictions or protections in place, revealing that the remaining 18,000 housing units are affordable to low-income households naturally, and this can be due to market factors or the age of the building, age of the structure, location, amenities. A key indicator, as I mentioned, age. That's what you can see on the right side of the screen here is the housing units by decade built, and it's a comparison between Federal Way and King County. Out of all of our housing stock, a large portion, this is the left bar graph, was built between the 1960s and 1990s. A much larger share of our housing stock was built between the 1960s and the 1990s when you compare it to King County. King County has fairly similar housing stock built by decade, ranging between like 12 and 8%, with the exception of the 1940s, whereas Federal Way has a kind of a balloon effect, and I think this is evident in the narrative of the city, that there was a lot of accelerated growth in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that led to the city's incorporation. But as a result, a lot of this existing housing stock is aging and may have, due to deferred maintenance, be at risk of being renovated, or not at risk of being renovated, but the affordability of those units being lost. And that's where you get into anti-displacement.
Could I ask a
So do you have
question?
time for a question from Councilmember Honda first and then Councilman McDaniel?
Can you go back to the last slide? Can you define what a natural occurring affordable housing is?
Sure. I mean, I don't have a definition at my fingers, but naturally occurring affordable housing is different from income-restricted affordable housing, where, like, for example, the city has the 4% of housing units have to be income-restricted for projects with 25 units or more. Those are bound by a covenant and are restricted and something that is enforceable. Naturally occurring affordable housing is the housing that exists that no one requires it to be that price, and it could be, a landlord could choose to increase it at any time. It's not bound by a funder or a restrictive covenant or another mechanism to preserve or maintain affordability. It's kind of just like the market rate or market.
So what percentage of housing is that in Federal Way?
For
Natural,
For below 80% AMI, for the housing units that are affordable to low income, 84.6% are NOAA, are naturally occurring, meaning that 15% have those income restrictions and those limitations and protections to maintain and retain affordability.
are they located in one part of Federal Way versus other parts, or are they
The
spread
NOAA,
throughout?
the naturally occurring affordable housing?
Correct.
Good question. As part of being a SCIP member, we developed a dashboard of naturally occurring affordable housing, and it's throughout the city. It's really a lot of those apartment complexes that were built in the 80s that are in our RM zones that are dispersed. I mean, it's, I don't want to say mostly, but a lot of it is congregated in our mixed use and multifamily zones. So predominantly around between I-5 and Pacific Highway, but there's also substantial NOAA projects, existing NOAA projects outside of that corridor as well.
So are our numbers consistent with other cities around us?
That's something we could compare on, like, how much income restricted units we have versus how many others have.
Yes.
That's something we can compare. I don't have that. I believe King County has an affordable housing dashboard that reflects that information. I could follow up with a link or more information compared to other cities if you'd like.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Some of my questions actually might be about anti-displacement, so I'll wait till she finishes. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll just take it off now.
Okay. So here I've got two graphs, or no, they're not graphs, they're maps. I have two maps on the screen. The one on the left is generated by the PSRC, Puget Sound Regional Council, to assess the impacts of the regional growth strategy and expanding transportation access around the region. PSRC conducted did opportunity mapping and created a displacement index. And what this does is it assesses the likelihood of communities that are vulnerable to displacement. So in Federal Way, we're going to have two new light rail stations operating in the next couple years, just one outside of city limits, and then, of course, the downtown station, and another future Tacoma Dome link extension at the south point of the city. And those that amenity is valuable. It's marketable. It's I don't know. It adds value and attracts people. And what the concern is, as you can see on the map on the left, is those areas in red demonstrate communities or households that are rated as a higher risk of displacement, meaning that they're more likely or vulnerable to rents increasing at a rate that they can't afford, and resulting in the displacement or similar to like gentrification. This displacement can be defined in three separate but similar terms. There's financial displacement, when you can't afford to rent anymore. There's a new light rail station across the street and your landlord wants to capture that value, and so now your rent went from $1,200 to $1,800. You can't afford to live. That's financial displacement. There is physical displacement. You live in a old apartment complex and someone has bought it and they're choosing to renovate it, and they're going to renovate it or tear it down and build something back that's at a higher density and newer. And so now where you've been displaced from where you live.
Cheney,
And-
Lydia has a question. Can we,
Sure.
Lydia?
You can finish because I'm taking you back to the housing requirements and the housing stock, but maybe I can go ahead and ask Ben, we can talk about it later, but when we're talking about affordability, low-income housing and whatnot, we also have Section 8 in the mix. So those units are usually market rate, but subsidized by the Housing Authority. And I know that we also have affordable subsidized housing stock also, right? So just trying to see if we track Section 8 voucher holders that live in market rate units.
Yes, that is something that is a data point I've gotten from Sarah in the Community Service Department, but it doesn't go towards meeting a housing target at that income band. That's dependent on the Section 8 voucher or Housing Choice voucher recipient.
Availability, okay.
So
All right.
that doesn't go
That
towards.
was my question.
Okay.
But do we have at least a sense of,
Of how many? Yes, I don't have that in front of me, but I do have that data
Okay.
point. And I don't want to be wrong, so I'll add
Yeah.
that to my follow-up list. I don't have a pen.
all right, it might be helpful to this conversation, but sorry, I'm taking you back, but continue, sorry.
That's okay, I can include it in a future presentation as well. Back to displacement, there's one other form of displacement, and that's cultural displacement. And that can occur as a result of both financial and physical displacement. So say a community where you're, maybe an ethnic grocery store or church in an area, the community that used to reside, and prices are going up and things are redeveloping, and you no longer have the culturally specific amenities nearby. So that is, in essence, cultural displacement, where those communities, those social ties are becoming eroded or displaced as a result, or pushed out of areas due to increased cost and or redevelopment. And basically, this is a key topic in the housing chapter for a couple reasons. One is we have identified areas in the city that are at risk of displacement, and it's an area of focus it works hand in hand with preservation. Being able to prevent displacement anti-displacement is in part preserving the existing housing stock we have to keep communities and their social ties intact. And this map on the right, it's maybe a little hard to see on your screens, but this is a map of the city with census tracts. And you can, and a bar graph of the racial composition of those neighborhoods. The census tracts outlined in purple contain more than 50% of the area being zoned multifamily, whereas the outlined in light purple, I think there's just one of those, is around 50% being both single-family and multifamily, and the blue being majority single-family. So in areas with majority multifamily, you can see higher rates of non-white households, so more diverse, in which this is indicative of some lack of access of neighborhood of choice in the city currently, and a reflection of affordability citywide. Any questions?
Paul, you asked the first one.
All right, sounds good. Just trying to get a better grasp of this comprehensive plan, I'm still trying to learn it. In the comprehensive plan, when we're going over some of these sections like this anti-displacement and the planning for equitable outcome, are we actually defining what those things are, or are we putting in play things that we think will either increase or decrease something? So prime example is you've talked about anti-displacement. What is the city in the plan, the comprehensive plan, going to be writing to keep the anti-displacement? Are we looking at trying to stop people from being forced out or people moving into places? So,
I guess the idea is the housing chapter to include strategies and implementing actions related to anti-displacement, to prevent the displacement of existing communities. So it's not just a defined term, but an approach to meeting our housing need.
So we're gonna limit people coming in order to keep people, I mean, this is the problem I have with some of this stuff is, it sounds like what we're doing is this anti-displacement is saying that if you already live there, we're gonna try to keep you there, even if somebody else would love to live in that spot too. So I'm kind of confused on how the city's gonna write any kind of legal descriptions that's gonna either increase someone to move to some place or stop someone from being bumped out of that place. I'm not sure how that's gonna, I don't understand how the city does that.
Sure. I think a key point to this is that when someone is being, maybe their apartment complex is being renovated, and they don't have an alternative that's affordable in the community that they live. So say their existing living situation is affordable, they're not spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and they, I don't know, they like live in the city and have lived in the city for 20 years, now their rents increase and they need to move out. Our anti-displacement would be ensuring that there are replacement or other housing options that are affordable to those income bands in the city. One approach to preventing displacement would be to preserve the existing housing. It's a lot cheaper, it's a lot faster, and it's a lot easier to preserve housing that's already built today than building new. I mean, we're gonna need both.
Yeah, I get that, but my question is, again, how does the city you can't force a place to say you can't change it, you can't force someone to say keep the price down. So I'm trying to figure out,
Yeah.
some of these things are great in mindset, but like planning for equitable outcome, you can't force someone to sell to somebody. You can't force someone not to sell to somebody. Red line stopped in the 1960s, I'm pretty sure. So it's like, how are we supposed to say that, hey, why are we saying that we need to say this race or this group or this sex needs to have more housing? Isn't it set up where if they can afford it, they can do it? How is the city gonna write code that forces one person to be, allows one person to buy by limiting the other person to buy? That's what part I'm confused on.
Okay, I think part of the conversation, again, taking a step back, is the 2015 housing chapter didn't include any conversation of race or ethnicity.
Well, why should it?
And there's really important, like, to be able to understand housing need, you have to dig deeper by different social economics lines to understand unique housing needs. So I think planning for equity is understanding equity, looking at, like, in the 2015 chapter, it wasn't clear if there were any disparities that existed, whether there were lack of homeownership options or or disparities in rates of homeownership. And our strategies can be informed by that information. It's not the city saying there is one example. There's something that I think the King County has adopted in White Center that's like a first right to return. So say you live in an apartment complex that is from 1980s and it's been purchased and redeveloped into something nicer and newer, and your rent was affordable at 50% AMI. Well, now when that new apartment complex gets built, you have a right to return. It's like who they're gonna lease to. It's maybe hard to implement, but it's something that's being done in the region. Another anti-displacement strategy is what we're currently doing is ensuring that new housing that's being built with 25 units or more includes income restricted units, creating mixed income housing. So one approach is to ensure that as development is occurring and housing costs are not keeping up with incomes, that we have units that are required to stay affordable at a lower income band. And that's already in code. That's something that we could change, we could mess with. We just adopted some amendments to it, but that's something that's already in action. Another option, which some cities, I think this is really highlighting some issues. These are key housing topics. And there are a lot of market forces at play that have created this as a problem that are outside of the city's control. And
In
so
the
there's,
last 10, 15 years?
I'd say probably bigger than that. But the goal here is to, I guess what we're doing is, relying on our regional partners, learning about what other cities are doing. For example, the city of Burien, and I think it's either Tukwila or Renton, has a notice of intent to sell. So of those 1980s apartment complexes that are affordable to 50% AMI or lower, when they want to sell, for someone to do whatever they want with it, whether they retain it or modify it or bulldoze it and build something new, that notice of intent to sell is shared with other preservation agencies like this, King County Housing Authority, South King County Housing Authority, or other nonprofit or agencies that their purpose is to preserve housing affordability. So that they be notified because, and aware before those naturally occurring affordable housing units are sold and maybe lost to redevelopment or revamping or just increased rents.
Councilmember Walsh, you have a question?
Yeah, it sounds like that this philosophy would be discouraging people from renovating and improving their properties.
These,
And would-
what I've listed here are strategies or actions other cities have done, examples, best practices, none of which, I mean, one besides the inclusionary zoning the city has, we have not adopted. I think that there's a balance here between health, safety, welfare, and preserving existing housing that is affordable. And
Yeah, I mean, I guess that my concern is that here, what we want to improve the quality of the city. We want to improve the, beautify, improve the quality of the city. And it seems like that this is saying, don't do it.
So I want to take a step back a little bit, maybe start with what Councilmember McDaniel asked. So the comprehensive plan is a set of goals and policies related to different topics. And then there's action items for how we then try to achieve that. So starting off with the goals and policies, there's like a continuum. So Cheney's identified issues with housing, whether it's preserving naturally occurring affordable housing or anti-displacement. There's going to be some goals and policies in the chapter, and depending on how passionate this community feels about those issues, we can be on this end of the spectrum or this end of the spectrum in terms of how much the city wants to kind of influence the outcomes there. And that's part of the conversation with the community as well as with you guys when it comes forward for adoption. And so I think what Cheney's identified is issues related to housing that we didn't address in 2015 because it just wasn't a priority then, but it is a priority now. And so we're starting to address a more nuanced level of issues associated with housing. And as she said initially, our anti-displacement might not be saying that your apartment or your house can't be fixed up. It means if it is and you can no longer afford it, there's another place for you to go in Federal Way. So that, there used to be a thing that, drive till you can afford your housing. Right now, we're trying to say is we should have all types of housing, all price levels, all cultural availability of housing so that if you get displaced from one residence in Federal Way, there's another one that you would gladly move into where you then don't have to change your life. So I think, again, it gets back to if that's a great outcome, then maybe that's as far as we go. If we want to actually talk about incentives or additional regulations to keep people hopefully in their homes, we can have those conversations, but that's part of that continuum that we have to decide on in terms of adopting this updated chapter.
I think it might be best if you guys could send me like last housing chapter, and I'll maybe be able to educate myself on that one a little bit. But like I said, when I see these charts and stuff like that, the first thing that comes to me, to my mind is this is fact, this is data, but then I don't know how you can manipulate it to get it to be the term equality, equal outcomes or anything like that. I find it hard to say, okay, we know that we show a lower income of lower housing ownership in blacks and Hispanics. Okay, I'm curious to know what the city's policy is going to be in order to change something that is usually in my mind a financial thing. So, like I said, I'll be curious to see what the reports have, and then I'll educate myself and come back with more questions then. Thank you.
Are you just about done?
I am. I wanted to add one more point to Councilmember Walsh's comment about maybe housing that's falling into disrepair. Why would we want to try to preserve that? Some of the strategies, goals and policies under the anti-displacement section of the draft housing chapter includes continuing what we do with our CDBG funds and our minor home repair program, which ensures that helps low-income households have fix the leaky roofs or things that and I'm not obviously very involved in that portion of the city's work, but other programs that the city does offer to help maintain health, safety, welfare, and support low-income households and housing units in the city.
I'm going to make one comment, and I think Lydia wants to say something, and then I think we're almost to the point where we can go home. But I want to thank you for your presentation, but I think we're going to have a lot of debate up here on this, because this is, all over the spectrum, and we have a housing crisis, we all know it. And I just want to tell a story that I heard about just the other day. A lady in Federal Way, I think she's like 88, owns a condo, wanted to sell it. It's going to get, I don't know, $150,000. She's an accountant, so she knows her numbers. And then she was told she didn't have enough money to move into Shag. So here's a lady in our town that's been productive for a very, very long time. She planned her money, she's older, she maybe has 10 years left if she makes it to 100 or whatever. But because she wanted to sell her condo and is going to have what she thought was enough money to live in Federal Way, was told by Shag that she didn't qualify. So it is a problem. It's going to be a controversial discussion because we don't own the property that we're trying to regulate or being asked to regulate. But we have to be compassionate, and we have to be fair to the people that are in our community and the businesses that invest. So I'm sure when you give us the timeline to have these discussions a little bit more, Keith, we'll have some good questions. Okay, Lydia, you got the last question before we go home.
Yeah, actually, it's not a question. I have more of a comment, and as I'm listening to what Sarah's saying and the questions, I think it's very important that we safeguard and try to serve or accommodate the different levels of socioeconomic when it comes to housing, because we all know if we don't have affordable housing, then we also are going to be dealing with homelessness issues. When it comes to upgrading and making sure that it's anti-displacement, we want to make sure that the same people who are living there still have the option to return. And I think if we don't have those safeguards and those languages in there, then they won't have the opportunity to come back. And also, what we had in our housing plan in the past may not have been applicable, but now because of the diverse population that we have, one of the reasons that there's a gentrification in Seattle, all of them moving south, is because at the time when they started developing fast and furious, they did not have safeguards in place to allow people to stay where they come from and where they couldn't afford. So I just want us to be very intentional as we review this and listen to what staff is saying and doing, because I believe it's very important that we understand why these languages and proposals are being put in place. It may or may not happen, but at the same time, I think it's very important that we are aware of and we have the language in there, and we also are intentional about serving the diverse population that we have coming into our city. And also, there was something else I was thinking about, but I think it's important to have, again, it's just about having the safeguards in place because it's necessary, otherwise people will be displaced. And if people choose not to upgrade or fix their places, I think that's also another thing we need to talk about, because people should not live in any sub housing unit. So I think that's also another conversation we have to make sure that all apartments and houses are livable and safe for everyone. So I hope people don't try to not upgrade or not fix because of these languages that we have in our comprehensive plan. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Okay, one last comment, Janie, or are we wrapped up?
No, yeah, I'm all good, thanks.
I want to thank you for your presentation, both the climate change and the housing. It's very informative and things we need to hear. So I appreciate all the work that's been put in. On that, we're going to call our meeting adjourned, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.